turned 12 on my computer, so we'll kick off. And for those who haven't met Linda before, Linda is the CEO and founder of NeuroCapability. And as she mentioned a minute ago, she's on a mission to change the world one brain at a time, which is one of the best mission statements I've ever heard. And she's also she's put together a course called the Neuroscience of Leadership, and it is very, very much based on research. But what we'll see today, I imagine, as we've seen in other webinars, is research coming to life and being put into practical terms. So and the really exciting thing about today is that Linda will be talking about some new thinking, which will become, I've no doubt, commonplace in neuroscience in years to come. So first of all, thank you everyone for joining. Welcome to the webinar, and take it away, Linda. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave, for that lovely introduction. I'm just going to share my screen so everyone can see what they need to be seeing. Fantastic. Okay. So I'm just going to move this little picture. Okay. All right, so welcome to the webinar. As Dave said, I'm excited to be sharing some new material with you today. I've only shared this once before in a public forum, and that was at a conference last week, and I was saying to people I was really excited because I'm an extrovert, and I got to be live at a conference, and it was fantastic. And it seemed to resonate with people there, so I thought I'm really excited to be sharing this new material with you today. So brains of certainty, let's talk about what I'm going to cover in this 45, well, it's 1 hour, but I'll speak for around 45 minutes, and then there'll be time for you to stay on the call and ask questions, etc. I'm going to firstly just talk briefly about the secrets of high-performing teams, because I'm guessing people on the call, you'd like to be part of a high-performing team. I know we aim to be a high-performing team in our work world as well. Then I want to start sharing some of the new material that I talked about at the beginning, and this has come about through my research in my PhD. And I'm looking at the antecedent, so the thing that comes before psychological safety, because we know psychological safety is really critical. And it's a term that I've called social safety. So I'll explore that and share what I mean by that and the model that I'm kind of working on. It's a bit of a work in progress. So any feedback or comments I'd be very grateful for. I'm going to talk a little bit about the drivers of psychological safety, because the brain plays a really big role in how we keep people psychologically safe in the workplace. And I'm going to talk about some practical kind of tools that you can use to play your part in building social safety and really leading with the brain in mind. I'm sure many people are familiar with this organisation, Google. They were really kind of curious and interested why some of their teams were high performing and other teams weren't. And so they launched a project called Project Aristotle, and the goal of this was to, if you like, codify team effectiveness and look at why some teams excelled and why some fell behind, even if they had the same sort of experience level within a team. So they did this for 2 years. They looked at 180 teams. They did about 200 interviews, and they still couldn't figure it out after 2 years. And then they came across research by Amy Edmondson, who's a professor at Harvard, and her research focused on norms in teams. And so they kind of put this new lens and revisited the data, and they found 5 key ingredients that they refer to as the secret of team or high performance. And the list of these is dependability. So this is really that people got things done on time and met expectations. I'm sure you've all been in a situation where people have let you down. Well, when you're a high-performing team, this doesn't happen. There was structure and clarity. So clear goals. They all knew what they were trying to achieve, and they had very well-defined roles. The third one was meaning. The work had some sort of personal significance to each team member. They got joy out of their work. And the fourth one was impact. So this is that they saw that their work was purposeful and that it contributed to the greater good of their team or indeed the world. And Google obviously does some interesting work. Been in the news quite a bit recently too. But the fifth one was the key ingredient, and was this psychological safety. And I'm sure you're hearing this term because it's becoming more and more talked about. In fact, there was just an article by McKinsey looking at psychological safety and linking it with different types of leadership styles. So if you haven't had a chance to have a look at that, you might want to Google it and have a look at it. We'll send the link out to people. So what is psychological safety? And you know, some of you may be all over this. For other people, it might be something that you're still trying to get your head around. So Amy Edmondson really talks about it as a belief that you won't be humiliated or punished for speaking up or speaking out. And she talks about it as having kind of a shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. It's not a new concept. It was kind of introduced in about 1965, but we're seeing through the work of Professor Amy and other people in the work that we've been doing in measuring psychological safety, that it's getting traction. And if you're not across this, you really probably need to be looking at it, because it's really important as a leader to be understanding, how do we keep people psychologically safe? How do we support them to speak up and speak out? I guess a little while ago, I was looking at psychological safety, and my PhD supervisor, Professor Justin Kennedy, we were having a chat, and he kind of proposed to me that really the brain is in either a fear on or a fear off state. And I kind of went away and I did some thinking, and I thought, that doesn't quite fit with me. So what is it that people do in a social context? Because we know work is a social context, as is, you know, our engagement in neighbourhoods, as customers, we're interacting with other people. And so I started to look at, well, is there something that happens that is kind of like the thing that occurs before and impacts on our psychological safety? And I came up with this idea that we really need to be looking at the thing that happens before we actually become consciously aware of whether we feel safe or we don't feel safe. And it's really a snap judgment that the brain, that our brains make in every interpersonal context that we move into. So obviously, you know, there's a fairly stable one in your team, and you know, until someone else comes into the team. But you engage with stakeholders, you engage with other departments, you engage with customers and other people. And really what's happening in the moment is that your brain is making an assessment, because our brain is trying to keep us safe. And moment by moment, we're taking in around 20 million bits of information, but we're only consciously aware of about 40 pieces of information. And this is your brain selectively, because obviously you'd go into complete meltdown if you were aware of 20 million bits of information. This is your brain selectively deciding what you should pay attention to. So you walk into a meeting and you are looking at, so the first one in this, you know, you're making this snap judgment. So you're taking information in through your senses, you know, what you see, what you hear, and you're making observations in that moment. And then your brain kind of is selectively deciding what you should pay attention to. You know, what is the body language? Do people look comfortable and relaxed, or do they look tense or angry or frustrated? So your brain is going, oh, I better pay attention to that, because you know, these people don't look so happy. Maybe what they're not happy about might be something that could harm me. And this activates our reward or our threat circuitry in our brain. So we know that that's kind of where we physiologically get ready for that fight, flight, or freeze. And your brain is also making predictions. Okay, have I been in this situation before? And this is consistent with the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett. If you haven't come across her work is wonderful in linking the prediction role of the brain with emotions. And so then you make a plan. And your plan, and all of this happens pretty much in microseconds outside of your conscious awareness. And then we actually make a plan to either productively engage or protect ourselves based on our snap judgment of that social safety in that social context. And we come to conclusions, which is where it moves into that psychological safety, because we're able to consciously kind of say why we're not feeling safe or we're feeling safe. So this is the kind of work I'm talking about, is looking at, what assessments we're making. And really, if you're leading with the brain in mind, one of your key things that is important is to understand that we need to be positively influencing that social safety of people in any situation that they're in. And I guess this got me thinking about, I love lead versus lag. I've been frustrated for many years about all of the measures that we have in place that are lag indicators. They're the result of something. And so I guess what I'm proposing and what I'm suggesting in this model of social safety is that it's the ultimate lead indicator. So it's the thing that influences how psychologically safe we feel, and it influences our physical safety outcomes, mental health, well-being. It influences whether we're engaging or whether we're kind of present but we're not really there, whether we can engage in innovation and creativity. And it also ultimately influences the customer experience, because think about a customer coming into a store, just how they're treated in that moment, that they step over the threshold into that social context. They're making that social safety assessment, and it influences their willingness to purchase or to walk straight out of the store. And this ultimately impacts culture. The culture of the organisation is really influenced by our social safety and our psychological safety. And ultimately, this impacts our business results. And we know this because we've been measuring psychological safety and looking at the correlation between psychological safety and whether we meet KPIs, financial and non-financial. And so really what this does is we then move into either I don't feel safe, so this idea of protective to productive mode, I don't feel safe. And when we don't feel safe in that, from a psychological perspective, we tend to turn our attention inwards, we hunker down, we're just focused on, watching our back and keeping ourselves safe. And it might mean that you're just going through the motions because you need a paycheck at the end of the day, but you're not really putting in any discretionary labour or going beyond what you absolutely have to do. You might find people take more sick days because they're not enjoying work. They're in a constant threat state at work. We will see stress. You will see then negative health outcomes from that. And people really don't like change in that situation. So they'll be quite resistant to change. And I think about this as a continuum from where I feel completely unsafe to where I feel completely at ease and safe, able to speak up and speak out. My attention is outwards. I'm much more willing to engage in new things and try new things. It's where we would see a kind of like a growth mindset where people see mistakes as opportunities for learning rather than being punished and humiliated for making a mistake. You would see high levels of engagement. People are energized. They're much more likely to be able to come up with creative and innovative ideas, and we see greater resilience. So these are words that we see bandied around a lot, well-being and resilience. It's influenced significantly by our psychological safety. So obviously we want, if we're leading a team, and I'm guessing there's some leaders on the call or on this webinar today, you really want to be seeing people in that productive mode as opposed to protective mode. So my kind of definition, or my working definition of social safety is that it's an individual's perception, and it's all about perception, that they feel socially safe to engage in interpersonal risk-taking. As I said, it's a working definition, and I'm still kind of playing around with these ideas. So I'm just going to pause for a moment and ask any questions or comments on this. Is it resonating or not resonating? Is it making sense to you? What do you think of this concept of social safety?
I hope we're creating a socially safe and psychologically safe environment here, and people aren't too scared to put something in the chat pane, but there's no questions there as yet. But if I could just ask briefly, Linda, that what you're talking about is going to the subconscious level. Is that one of the biggest differences to with where thinking is at the moment to what you're looking at?
Yes, so I'm really, as part of my PhD, I'm looking at what's happening in the brain when we're doing that social safety assessment. So we really haven't examined what's happened neurologically and physiologically in that moment. So I guess I see that that's a little bit of a gap in the literature, and there's some problems with the term psychological safety. A lot of people feel uncomfortable with that, and I know that some people have been sharing, that I've shared this concept with, are taking it into, for example, there's a large hospital in Brisbane, and they've been kind of sharing this idea of social safety, and it's resonating with people. It makes sense to people, and it seems to be a term that they feel more comfortable with as well.
That's a very good choice of words there, Linda, because Anne has commented that it's absolutely resonating. Bravo. We've got a comment from me, I think I've pronounced that right. Makes so much sense, especially where I work. And Jodie's commented, love the depth and realism you provide, Linda. It's next level. Thank you.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Well, I'm going to move on to the next section, and if there are any other comments or questions, I'd love to hear them. Let's move on to some of what are the drivers of psychological safety perceptions. Again, it is our perception, that once we've made that snap judgment of how we feel in a social context. I've shared this before in the past, but for those of you that haven't been on these webinars before, it's really important to understand the impact that leaders have on psychological safety. But here's the challenge. 75% of employees say that the most stressful part of their job is their immediate supervisor. And, think about it for a moment. A lot of the businesses and organisations that I've gone into over the years, they promote their people based on their technical expertise, but then they don't give them the handbook for how they then lead people. So I think in some ways we've set leaders up for failure, and I don't think we should be putting the blame on leaders for creating stress. They're doing the best they can in that moment, but they haven't learned some of the basic skills that they may need to ensure the social and psychological safety of their people. And the research is showing that leaders influence psychological safety by about 70%. And we've seen this in our PS25. So we have a survey instrument that measures psychological safety, and there are 5 questions that measure leadership influence. And we're seeing a very strong relationship between the scores for leadership influence and scores for the psychological safety of the team. So that's the first bit of information to understand. The second, my beautiful, wonderful relationship with my brain. As I've said to people in the past, I started looking at the neuroscience in about 2006, and I've been kind of on this journey with understanding my own brain and understanding how, as you understand your brain, it can positively influence how you interact with other people, how you lead, how you manage change, how you create innovation in the workplace. But really, the key role of your brain is to keep you alive and safe, because that's continuing as a species. And the interesting thing is that we're more tuned to noticing threat in our environment, obviously because threat can harm you, than reward. And really, one of the kind of key organising principles of the brain is to minimise threat, maximise reward. And so we're also, the brain is constantly predicting, based on the information coming through our senses, how we should behave in that moment. So it's obviously making those snap judgments. And there are probably 5 key drivers that influence our psychological safety. And some of you may be familiar with this model, but I'm just going to go through it briefly. As I'm talking about it, we know that these things drive all of our behaviour, but we do have preferences for certain things that may, make us flip our lid and move into threat, or we experience more reward when that need is met. So the first of these is significance, and this is our drive to be positively regarded by other people in a social context, or in the workplace, or outside of the workplace. So we really ultimately are asking a question, or our brain's assessing the extent to which I matter in the eyes of others. So part of that social safety assessment is looking at, how are people greeting me? Are they asking for my opinion? Are they acknowledging the expertise and the skills that I bring to the situation? The second is certainty, and this is links with the idea that the brain is a prediction organ. we want to, we have a drive to be able to predict what's going to happen next in order to keep us safe. So we're really looking at, do I have clarity now and into the future? And if you remember at the beginning of the presentation, I spoke about Google, and this links with that dependability, and it also links with the clarity. You know, I spoke about people need clear roles and expectations. So we know that we want to know what's going to happen. And in fact, we spend a lot of time trying to predict the future, and we quite often get it wrong. So we spend a lot of wasted energy trying to predict things that we don't really have certainty about. The third one is our drive to have choice and influence. And so we really want to be masters of our own destiny, and we don't like to be micromanaged. We really want to be able to choose how we do our work and feel like we can input into decisions that affect us. And you know, this is why people really resist and react badly to being micromanaged, which has been interesting in this COVID world, where a lot of people have been working from home, and some leaders have really struggled with that because they feel they don't have, you know, they can't view their people, and so they've moved into some of that micromanaging, and that does not work well for people. The fourth one is our drive to feel like we are connected, that we're part of a tribe, that we belong. So we want to feel like our leaders care about us and that we are part of a group. And so we can sometimes get see this happening in organisation where there's a strong in-group in one area and they don't get on so well with this other area. But that comes back to this whole idea of friend or foe, that we see people as foe before friend until we can see that they're like us as opposed to not like us. And the fifth one is this drive to get an equitable share of resources. So we really want to be, it's our drive to feel like we're being treated equitably and fairly. So we're not seeing a leader that is favouring someone else in the team. And in fact, we also watch this for our teammates. So part of our in-group, if we see that one of them is not being treated fairly, that generates quite a significant threat in us. So these are the things that when we're assessing, when we make that snap judgment, that influence our social safety and ultimately our psychological safety. We'll have preferences, as I said earlier. So my number one is equity. And, you know, my first career was in social work, and I've always been interested in social justice and wanting to make the world a better place. Followed very closely by autonomy, which is why I work for myself and have interest in a couple of companies. Certainty is my number 5. And so it means as a leader, I have to be very mindful that I give certainty to the people that I lead, and that I give them the detail that they need. And given that it's not my number 1, and I don't have as great needs for certainty, I have to be very mindful of adjusting my style to make sure I meet people's needs. So if you look at this acronym, it's SCARE. And really what we want to be able to do is change scare into cares. So be positively influencing these drivers. So as a leader, how do we positively influence these drivers of behaviour so that we move people into productive mode as opposed to protective mode? And I think it's really important, we say this a lot in our programs and the work that we do, that no two brains are alike, but we all think that everyone thinks like we think. So it's important to get to know your people and know what their drivers are and the things that are influencing their behaviour and their perceptions of their social and psychological safety. So I want to move into a little bit of some of the key things that you can do to lead with the brain and mind and play your part in influencing social safety. And again, this comes back to the SNAP, the acronym that we've developed to look at this whole concept of social safety. And really, you'll see there's probably 4 key things that I think we need to be paying attention to. And this is some of the new material that I haven't shared before. The first of these is stepping up, what we call step up. So stepping up to do leader work. And I'm going to go into detail on these in a moment. The second thing is around noticing the brain at work, your own, and also what's happening in other, the brains that you influence in your team. The third is acting with the brain in mind. So really understanding that the brain drives behaviour and being very mindful of what that means and how you can adjust and change your style to support people. And obviously really important to be constantly thinking about how am I protecting the psychological and social safety of my team. So if we start with step up, if you think about what are some of the things that leaders need to be thinking about. We need to be thinking about how are we showing up to work, whether that's a virtual environment or a face-to-face environment. Have you had enough sleep? Are you eating well? Are you exercising? So it's really trying to make sure that you're in the best frame that you can be to do your best leader work. So really monitoring your energy level one of the things that I've seen in this COVID environment is that people are working much longer hours and kind of working in their commute time. So making sure that you lead by example, that you aren't sending emails at 2 o'clock in the morning. Really importantly, it's how are you self-regulating? Because we know that emotions are contagious. So if you're in a bad mood and you come into work in a bad mood, you spread that bad mood with other people and you put them into that protective mode as opposed to productive mode. So that's the first one, thinking about how you're stepping up to do leader work. The second one, noticing your brain at work. So it's really thinking about moment by moment, what is driving your behaviour? Now, are you feeling psychologically and socially unsafe? And what can you do to kind of address that? What's driving the behaviour of your people? So what are you noticing? Are people in that productive mode or are they in that protective mode? And really thinking about where is your attention focused? And we know that that when we're dividing our attention, then we're not seeing, we miss some things. We miss some really important things. So if you're in a meeting and your attention is on your device, you might miss some subtle signs that things aren't going so well between a couple of team members, and you miss an opportunity to influence positively that social and psychological safety. The third one is around acting with the brain in mind. So it's really thinking about how are you mitigating threat for yourself and your people? How are you showing some of those things around creating certainty, autonomy, helping people understand that they matter, and making sure that people are being treated fairly and equitably. I don't have a lot of time to go into this, but we also know that bias, cognitive bias, plays a really significant role in how we interact with other people. So really when we're acting as a leader, we need to be also reflecting and asking ourselves, am I bringing a bias into this situation and how can I mitigate against that bias? Most importantly is, am I remaining curious in this moment? So curiosity is one of the best tools in your leader kit. And from the McKinsey research that I talked about at the beginning, they've uncovered two things that are really important in building psychological safety. So they talk about some of the different leadership styles. And one of the areas that they've uncovered is this idea of humility. So are you a humble leader? Are you acting with humility as being really important? And also sponsorship. So how are you supporting other people and sponsoring them to do their best and and to grow as an individual in the work role? And lastly, protecting. Are you supporting social safety to build resilience? We're talking about all these programs around mental first aid and resilience. It's kind of like the horse has already bolted. We need to be going right back to the basics of how we keeping our people socially and psychologically safe. And how are we also doing that in a way that holds people to account? Because some people have said, psychological safety sounds really warm and fuzzy. Really, we can have high psychological safety, but not really be performing. So we want people to be performing and to be held to account for their performance as well. And that's where we see the high performing teams they have high levels of psychological safety, but they also hold each other in a psychologically safe way, hold each other to account for their actions. So if you go back to the Google thing, I talked about dependability. You hold people to account for getting things done on time and meeting expectations. And there's ways to have those courageous conversations if that's not happening. So those are the kind of the four key components of what we're talking about in terms of this SNAP safety model that we're developing. Some of the things that might be useful is to think about when you notice threat, what are some of the things that you can do, or what are the questions you can ask to get curious and try and find out what's going on for the other person or for yourself. And if you think about significance, it might be a question like, how can I tap into your expertise better? Because people they love giving advice. They love being able to say their opinions asked for. So that's really important. And secondly, you might be looking at certainty. Notice that someone seems to be in a bit of a threat state around certainty. Just asking them, what can I do to give you more certainty here? Just a really simple question like that can mean they feel heard, and that you can adjust your style to give them that certainty that they need. Autonomy. What would you like to have more choice and influence over? So if a person's feeling like they're out of control and they don't have any choice or influence, trying to get a sense what they would like to have choice and influence about. People feeling like team members don't care about them. Well, what can we do to demonstrate that? And we know that in this time where a lot of people have been working in a virtual environment, we really need to be checking in and have a connection point with people so that we're demonstrating that we care about them, that they're not just off in their home office and left to their own devices. We want to be checked in with, and we want to be able to show that we care about each other in the team environment. And if people are saying this doesn't seem fair, actually asking people, what would fair look like from your perspective? So I guess what I'm suggesting is, try and start building up like a question bank that you can use to support you in building social safety in the workplace. So this is another kind of like new acronym kind of model that I was thinking, what are the key components that support us to lead in a way that creates a socially safe and psychologically safe team environment? And the first of these is listening. Now that sounds like, oh, duh. But I don't know about you. I think it's a skill that we've lost somewhere along the way. We really need to listen when people are speaking rather than trying to think about what we're going to say next. So as a leader, just try and actually listen to people, and don't feel like you have to fill silence. If there's silence, stay silent, because when people are silent, they might be on the verge of actually having an insight. So silence can work in your favour. The second one in this leading idea is engaged. You need to show that you're fully present and that you're interested in what your team members have to say, that you aren't dividing your attention to another device. And we see this with children. When children feel like they don't have your full attention, they might grab your shirt or your skirt, or they'll come into your front of your face and go, "Mum, mum, mum." As humans, we want to feel like you're present with us and paying attention to us. Adapting. So think about your style. And remember I said to you, no two brains are alike. How do you adjust your style? Like if you know that certainty is your number 5, but you have people with high needs for certainty, make sure that you address that and adjust your style. So, and that might mean that, you have to kind of get more comfortable with getting more detail than you would like. And that people that have high needs for certainty, for example, might be slower in making decisions. So rather than pressuring them to make a decision, you give them that time to do that. Delivering. This has been really important and we'll be sharing some research that we've done in interviewing leaders to look at what were the good things that happened from a leadership perspective in this COVID and post-COVID, coming out of COVID environment. And communication came up as the number 1. It was really important to make sure that communication is a really big focus of what we're doing. Are we making sure that everyone knows what's going on? And are we delivering these messages in a way that doesn't generate threat? And thinking about delivering from a communication perspective, it's also about, are we connecting it back to the why and to the purpose of what we're doing? And it's interesting because some people say, well, we've already communicated that. Well, you might have communicated it once, but you might have to do it 3, 4, 5, 6 times before people really hear that, particularly when we see levels of kind of stress in a workplace. I is about being interested, that you care about your team members and that they matter to you. Make sure you spend time connecting with people to find out how they're going and checking in with people. new. So if you think about some of the things that we've talked about in terms of psychological safety and social safety, we need to feel it's okay to make mistakes. You know, none of us are perfect. How do we encourage people to try new things and actually say, look, let's try it. If we're not perfect at it, that's okay. But can we adopt a growth mindset so that we learn from our mistakes? And gee, this is the genuine. This is really important, and it's about being authentic. And I referred to this idea of being humble and using humility. We really want to be authentic in how we're working with people, and that may mean if you come in and you're not feeling so great, that you actually say to people, hey, I just need to let you know I'm not in the best space here today. And you show that you're vulnerable and that you're authentic. And we also need to show our team members that they can trust that I will do what I've said I'm going to do. You know, if you kind of make all these promises and then you don't deliver, then we know that causes threatening people. So think about, from your own perspective, you know, what can you do to make sure you're leading in a way that supports social and psychological safety. So I'm just going to talk a little bit more about some of these, some really simple things that you can try that support you to lead with the brain in mind and to build that social safety. And so I talked a little bit about listening deeply. When you've asked a question of someone, you know, it's really important to just stop and pause and listen. And there's some really basic skills that most of you probably already have, which is that paraphrasing. So people feel listened to when you say, so what I hear you saying is X, Y, and Z. That is such a simple thing to do, but it gives that person a reward because they feel heard and listened to. And it's difficult sometimes to do that and suspend, you know, thinking about what you're going to say next. And it's important to try and just stay in that moment, stay present with that person, and you know, the eye contact to show that you're listening. Even things like saying, can I just summarize what I think, what I've understood from what you've said? Again, that shows that you're listening. Make sure you ask people for opinions. I heard a lovely story of a leader who wanted to do kind of like a restructure of his team. And the person that was coaching him said, well, how are you planning to share this with the team? And he said, oh, well, I'm just going to share them. I'm just going to show them what I think the new structure would be. And this person that was coaching this person said, what would it be like if you actually just asked people to, you know, a question? If we were going to restructure this team to be more effective, how would you do it? And so this person thought, oh, okay, I'll give that a go. And he did. And they came up with some amazing ideas, and some of them that he hadn't considered. And so in the end, they got a much better outcome. And I think that it's really important to show that we want to hear what people think. Even if we don't agree with what they're saying, it's important to make sure that every person gets to voice their opinion. And don't be too quick to judge. You know, when someone says something, we can often dismiss it if it doesn't fit with our view of the world. So again, you know, continue to kind of be in that place of I don't think we can ever be non-judgmental, but trying to suspend your judgment so that you can make sure that you get, you know, the views of every person in your team. Curiosity, just being genuinely curious. This is really, really simple, but it's so important, and it's what I think makes a real difference for good leadership and not so good leadership. And, you know, there's lots of really great questions you can ask. You know, have you got a hunch about this? Talk me through how you came up with this idea or came to this position. And again, this is about suspending judgment. So when you are genuinely curious, you want to understand the thinking behind where a person has become to a position or a view. You know, actually just reflecting and noticing that a person has a firm opinion and trying to find out where that came from. Another favourite question of mine, you know, what is the most outrageous thing we could do in this situation? When you notice that a team is stuck, it can sometimes move people from feeling stuck to thinking in a more innovative and creative space. And, you know, is there a question we haven't asked about this? It's another really good question. You'll have your own kind of question bank, but I guess what I'm suggesting is that we need to be asking curious questions so that we can make sure that we're, keeping people in that productive state as opposed to that protected state. And finally, I just want to talk a little bit about some of the language caution. So one of the things that we know, in a social context, when we're interacting with other people at an interpersonal level, when we ask people, why do you think that? Just that word why actually elicits a threat in people. So again, try and stick with the curious questions. Saying to people, you should do this. That feels great for us. In fact, we get lots of reward when we give advice to other people. You only have to have had a baby to experience all the parenting advice, the birthing advice, all that you get. That's not how I would do it. Saying that to someone, it's again going to just generate a big threat in that autonomy space. Yes, but means, yeah, I haven't really agreed with you. Everyone else gets it. No one wants to hear that, because that really generates a threat in that significance domain that I spoke about. And if I were you, again, we're in advice mode instead of curiosity mode. So I've covered a fair bit of ground, and we've got 5 minutes to go before I pause. I just want you to reflect on what I've spoken about, and is there anything that's resonated for you that you go, yeah, you know what, I probably need to tune up my listening skills, or I need to practice curious questioning, or I need to be more mindful of self-regulating before I get into the workplace. And I just want you to quickly pick 3 things that you'd like to focus your attention on. Because we know that, you can come along to something like this, but you don't see any behaviour change as a result of hearing the material that you have. So pick 3 things, maybe share it with someone else. Say, hey, these are 3 things I want to work on, and monitor your progress. So have a look at them every day and notice if you're having success in that. And if you are, give yourself a big pat in the back, or look at, what are the ways that I need to keep it. What I guess I'm saying to you is psychological safety matters, and it's really a key moderator of high-performing teams and ultimately business success. And so my question to you is, are you leading with the brain in mind? And that's, I guess, what I've been trying to share with you today, and hopefully some of it's resonated with you. I'd love to hear thoughts around some of the models that I've shared and whether they landed okay with people. So Dave, do you want to have a look at the chat pane and pose any questions? Or
we obviously must have demonstrated a very psychologically safe workplace, because we've got a lot to cover in the chat pane. Sorry, just going back quite a few steps to when you presented those models, there was a couple of comments that I might tie together. One says maybe social and professional safety to bring it into the workplace. That was from Jody. And Katie mentions, makes sense to me, it's a clear antecedent, given it would apply every time you walk into a room. So maybe you might have a comment on those 2 together.
Yeah, look, I think I like that idea of professional safety. That's an interesting concept. And you're right, it is an antecedent. It happens, that snap judgment, that social safety assessment happens in every single social situation that we find ourselves in. It happens at family gatherings, at neighbourhood meetings, when you even walk into a conference. So it's important to be mindful of that.
We also have a comment. I'm not sure exactly how to read this one. It's from Anna. She says, we name it up as trauma-informed practice. So I think you might get the gist of that.
Yeah, look, I think that from my social work background, trauma-informed practice is really critical in understanding the negative impact that a continued threat state has on someone. So if a person has a really bad experience in a team, they can actually experience trauma. And, so it's really actually understanding that that we play a role in we're not there to fix people's mental health. If a person has a mental health challenge, it's not our job to fix it. It's our job to do no more harm. So it's really thinking about how do I create a social safety space for people so that they don't experience any further harm.
We also have a comment from Tony that says he strongly resonates, and notes it's a much harder to build this awareness and skill. And we've also got a question on the source for something. It was the 70% influence on psychological safety.
Yeah, if you have a look at the work of Gallup and Amy Edmondson, they talk about some of the stats around that.
Yeah, there was a couple of people suggesting it might have been McKinsey.
Yeah, McKinsey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we might try and get a link for a source on that and post that with the recording of the session.
Yeah, that would be great.
And just skipping through a couple of others down here, a couple of people had to leave, unfortunately.
We might go to the next slide, and then I'll stay on because it's just so I don't know if you want to just talk about this briefly, and then I'll stay on the call and answer any other questions. Are you going to talk about this, Dave?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I'm just writing a note of the next question that I want to get to. We did ask to put this at the end of the slide because I did want to mention the neuroscience of leadership course, which Linda has put together. The two comments that I would like to make about it is that the course is very much focused on neuroscience, the good science and the research, but adapted to practical purposes. And as you've seen in this webinar is a good example of the kind of material that's covered in the course, such as the curious questions that Linda put up a few moments ago and exact phrases to avoid and ones to use. They are very, very practical tools to put into the workplace. But the important thing is this isn't just a course about leadership or management. It is a formal qualification, which there's no other course like it in the world that has that fully accredited status. So for those who are interested in doing the neuroscience of leadership course, the next one starts at the end of this month, and we'll get a link, if not in the chat pane here, we will send it out with a link to the recording of the webinar, so you can follow that up. Linda has very generously offered a $500 deposit limit. You only need to put $500 down as a deposit, and she's guaranteeing places that come in before the 19th of February, because it is a small groups, and study calls, for instance, are limited to smaller numbers. So I would encourage people to have a look at what's involved in the course. You've got an idea of the sort of material that Linda covers, and it can certainly be change people's lives and certainly change workplaces. So,
and you'll learn a lot about yourself and your brain and how it works and why it does what it does.
Thank you.
And there's a great testimonial from the great Troy.
Thanks, Troy.
And I also should mention on that graphic, it was covered up on my screen, so I couldn't see it. But Linda said that she would get us some copies of Lisa Feldman Barrett's new book, the 7.5 Lessons About the Brain. So I'm very keen to read that because I'm fascinated to know what half a lesson is going to constitute. But
you have to read the book.
I should just check with Linda that that will be available for anyone that joins the course on the next intake.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, beautiful.
Special bonus. Terrific. All right. So additional questions.
Yeah, back to the questions, which I actually flicked across to another screen there and lost them for a minute. There's a very good question here about when psychological safety has been eroded, what are the key first steps to move the dial back towards a socially safe work environment?
I think it starts with the leader. So really supporting the leader to understand how they can take some simple steps to positively influence the social and psychological safety of the team. Obviously, some education works with people. So we've seen in a 91-day cycle with some education and coaching, we've seen some massive shifts in psychological safety and in business performance because they're linked together. So it doesn't have to be massive interventions, but I think what I find really interesting is we use the sheep dip approach in leadership development, which I've I think is not the best use of our resources. I think when we've done something like measure psychological safety, we can actually then look at the teams where it's low and develop interventions that work specifically with that leader and that team to build psychological safety in that team.
And there's another question too, or a comment at least. The techniques to improve the SNAP was really helpful. I think awareness is one thing, but knowing what to do to improve it is equally important to focus on. That comes from Sarah.
Yeah, we've just developed a 6-module program called SNAP Safety, which, because not everyone wants to do a 18-month advanced diploma, but we've got a program now that you can take in that actually supports leaders in a 12-week process to improve psychological safety in the workplace.
And I'm just about to put up a link if anyone's interested in looking at more details about the course. And we also have a comment from Troy about the question bank, saying the question bank is definitely something I can improve on, especially the curious questions.
Yeah, you can continually add to your curious question bank.
Anna has written your leading, the LEADING acronym, Linda, is a different way of leading a team. I love it and I'll put it into practice. So that's fantastic. Emma's made a comment about the question bank is fabulous. Thanks for sharing this. Psych safety is assuming would enable growth and ultimately progress as teams feel more and more safe. Do you see this playing out in leadership and developing more courageous leaders?
Absolutely. And it's kind of interesting because I guess leaders have to be willing to be authentic and vulnerable and to work on themselves. And that's what I've seen over the years that I've been sharing this material with people is it does shift how they think about leading, and once they see the benefits of adjusting their behaviour and they see that their teams are being more creative, more innovative, they're not pushing back as much, and they're making their own decisions, they're solving problems, they start to see the benefits for themselves, and that's where we start to see those new habits around leading in this way being developed. But as I said earlier, I don't think people are getting the handbook for how you do this. And, the McKinsey report that we'll send to you, talks about that more authoritative style of leadership. They've done research that shows it doesn't build psychological safety, and yet we still see authoritative leadership, has a strong foothold in many companies in Australia and throughout the world.
We've also got another comment and a question about, we've got some students online, which is great. I'm doing the course currently too and loving it, very interesting. From Kathy. Me says, I am doing the course now and I love it. Still love seeing Linda in action with her webinar. We've got a couple of questions about the course, which I've put a link up. I'm about to test that link to make sure it works because it's been converted to a Zoom link. And Kathy says, can we get details of the SNAP course too?
Absolutely. Well, we can send that out with the copy of the recording.
Yeah, the link didn't work, Dave. It's just the meeting Zoom link.
Yeah, these two. All right. We'll get that course. We'll include it when we send out a link to the recording. We'll put a link to course information. So if you go to that link, you'll see you can download all the course information that you need. And that's about it. I think we've got one more comment just come in. I'd love to know how this plays into a values-based framework. Most individuals are triggered into threat when their values are crushed.
Yeah, look, I guess in my early practice, that was, I did a lot of values-based work. And I think what I notice is a lot of organisations are developing a set of values, but they're meaningless because they're developed by people that go away for a few days in a room. And so I think we need to be looking at not just values, but what that means. So if we have a value around respect, how do we demonstrate that? What does that look like in the workplace? If we were showing respect, how would we be engaging with each other? So I think, that we come up with these brilliant value statements, but then we don't actually develop the rules of engagement around value statements. So people then don't have ownership or buy into those statements. And I think one of the challenges that comes through is when people have strong values about and views about the world, and they notice that they're being compromised in the workplace. And that also makes people feel very psychologically not safe when you notice that there's a big discrepancy between your values and how you see the values being played out in an organisation. There's some really lovely work done by Chris Agris and Chris Schon many years ago. They're sociologists, and they looked at the espoused values in an organisation and the theory in use. And they showed that when there is a big gap between what you say you do and what you actually do, that means that organisations and teams engage in defensive routines because no one wants that gap to be exposed. So yeah, I'm always really curious when I go into an organisation and I say, what's your mission statement? And they go, it's written down somewhere. Has anyone got a copy of it? So people aren't connected to the purpose. And then when I ask about what do these values mean to you, often they can't say what they mean to them. And I think that that's a really big gap as well.
People need a mission statement, like changing the world one brain at a time, don't they? Something nice and succinct that says it all and it's easy to remember.
Yeah, it took me a long time to come up with that, though. It's something that happened overnight. I had a lot of different versions until that one I went, that's it. And yeah.
Is that a problem? A lot of places organisations that I've been involved with do have sessions where they come up with their mission statement in a 30-minute session during a planning day or something. Is a mission statement something that should be more evolving and more organic in growth?
Yeah, I think so. And I think I did a session it was a while ago with a whole organisation, and they were talking about their mission statement, and I broke them into small groups, and I said, I want you to look at that mission statement and write down what it means to you. And then they presented back, and there was such difference amongst people. They were absolutely shocked. And I said, okay, so there seems to be some work we need to do around getting everyone on the same page. And every team needs to understand what they do. If you go back to Google stuff around impact and meaning, you have to know how it connects into the purpose. What are we trying to do here? What's our why? And there's some, if you haven't looked at Simon Sinek's stuff, he does some great stuff on finding your why, and he's got tons of free stuff on his website. So look that up, and there's activities that you can go through with yourself and with your teams. So
we're almost exactly on the o'clock. So if anyone's got a quick question, we might be able to squeeze one more in. But I notice Roxy has posted the link that I was unable to post. Obviously, she's much better IT oriented than myself. So thanks for that, Roxy. If anyone wants to use that link, you can download more information about the course.
And access our free resources. Have a look on our blog, and if you look in categories, there's webinars. There's a ton of webinars that we've done. Share it with other people. That's in line with our mission to change the world one brain at a time. Take it into your teams. Even the recording from today, please feel free to share it with people that you think might find value in it. Thank you so much for participating, and it's lovely to see some of our current students and hopefully future students on this call. So thank you so much, and have a brain-friendly day. And I look forward to the next webinar that we'll advertise shortly.
Thanks very much, Linda. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Linda. Thanks, Dave.
Yes, thank you, Dave, for your co-pilot, and thank you for Roxy and all my team on the call. Cheers, everyone.